The grand chamber of the Galactic Council stretched for nearly a kilometer in every direction. Its walls gleamed with crystalline structures that pulsed with soft light, and the air hummed with translation fields that allowed hundreds of species to communicate. Today, the chamber held representatives from 216 civilizations, all gathered to witness what they believed would be a simple formality. Ambassador Day One stood at the center of the chamber, his black diplomatic uniform stark against the colorful array of alien forms surrounding him. He was a tall man, with gray hair and calm eyes that had seen 3 decades of military service before he became Earth's voice among the stars. Behind him stood his small delegation of 12 humans, all watching the proceedings with careful attention. Primarch Velthos descended from the central platform on shimmering wings. The insectoid leader's 4 arms carried the Standard Integration Accord, a document that had been signed by every species in the galaxy for the past 8,000 years. His compound eyes reflected the chamber's light as he approached the human ambassador, Ambassador Day One of Earth. Velthos's voice was translated into perfect Korean, then into the 30 other languages the human delegation could understand. The Galactic Council welcomes humanity to the community of civilized worlds. We have observed your species for 73 years, since you achieved faster-than-light travel. Your expansion across 47 star systems has been remarkable. Now, we invite you to join us officially. Day One bowed respectfully. Primarch Velthos, the people of Earth are honored by your invitation. A ripple of satisfaction moved through the assembled aliens. This was how it always went. The new species expressed gratitude, signed the accord, and began their integration into galactic society. Some species took longer to adjust than others, but none had ever refused. Velthos extended the accord toward Day One. The document floated on an anti-gravity field, its pages filled with thousands of clauses written in every known language. The accord is comprehensive, Velthos explained. It covers demilitarization protocols, technology sharing agreements, resource allocation standards, and adherence to galactic law. Every species has found these terms acceptable. They ensure peace and prosperity for all. End quote. Day One took the document and spent several minutes reviewing it, though he had already studied every word during the 6-month journey to the Council's home world. His delegation had analyzed each clause, debated every implication, and sent their recommendations back to Earth. The response from the United Earth government had been clear. Finally, Day One looked up at Velthos. Primarch, we have reviewed the accord carefully. We appreciate the Council's generosity and the peace you have maintained for millennia. He paused, and the chamber fell completely silent. However, humanity must respectfully decline. Tect, the silence shattered. Hundreds of alien voices erupted in shock, confusion, and disbelief. Translators struggled to keep up with the cacophony. Velthos's wings froze mid-flutter, his compound eyes widening in an expression that even humans could recognize as surprise. Decline? Velthos repeated, as if the word itself made no sense. Ambassador, perhaps there has been a translation error. No species has ever declined the accord. There is no error, Day One said calmly. We understand the terms perfectly. We simply cannot accept them. Counselor Rax, a being of living crystal who had served on the Council for 600 years, moved forward. Light refracted through his body, creating rainbow patterns on the floor. Ambassador, you must understand what you are refusing. The accord brings access to technologies that would advance your civilization by centuries. Medical treatments that could eliminate disease, energy systems that would power your worlds forever. Cultural exchanges that would enrich your people beyond measure. We understand, Day One replied. And we would welcome many of these benefits through mutual cooperation and trade. But the accord requires that we surrender aspects of our sovereignty that we cannot give up. Which aspects? Velthos asked, his voice strained. Day One gestured to the floating document. The demilitarization clause would require us to reduce our defensive capabilities to a level determined by the Council. We cannot accept external control over our ability to protect ourselves. The technology sharing provision would give the Council access to all our research and development, including projects we consider sensitive. The resource allocation standards would require us to obtain Council permission before establishing new colonies or exploiting resources in our own territory. These provisions exist for the good of all species, Rax said, his crystalline voice ringing like bells. They prevent conflict and ensure equitable distribution of the galaxy's resources. Perhaps, Daewon acknowledged. But they also mean that humanity would no longer be truly independent. We would become subjects of the Council, not partners with it. Subjects? Velthos's wings fluttered in agitation. The Council does not have subjects. We are a cooperative of equals. With respect, Primarch. Any relationship where one party can dictate terms to another is not a relationship of equals. The Accord, as written, would give the Council authority over fundamental aspects of our civilization. We cannot accept that. No matter how benevolent the Council's intentions, a new voice entered the conversation. It belonged to Chancellor Kyra, an amphibious being whose species had been among the Council's founding members. Ambassador Daewon. Every species that has joined the Council faced the same choice. All of them understood that some sacrifice of absolute independence was necessary for the greater good. Why does humanity believe it is different? Daewon met her gaze steadily. We don't believe we are different, Chancellor. We believe we are exercising the same right that every species should have the right to determine our own path. If other species are content with the Accord, that is their choice. But it is not ours. The chamber erupted again. But this time, the voices carried notes of anger. Several Council members demanded that humanity be given time to reconsider. Others suggested that the humans didn't understand the dangers of remaining outside the Council's protection. A few, surprisingly, remained silent and thoughtful. Velthos raised all four arms, calling for quiet. Ambassador, the Council will adjourn to discuss this matter. We ask that you and your delegation remain as our guests while we deliberate. Surely, given time, we can find terms that are acceptable to all parties. We are willing to discuss alternatives, Daewon said. But I must be clear, humanity will not accept any agreement that compromises our fundamental sovereignty. We are happy to cooperate with the Council as independent partners, but we will not subordinate ourselves to its authority. As the Council members filed out, murmuring among themselves in hundreds of languages, Daewon's delegation gathered around him. One of the younger diplomats, a woman named Hana, who also served as a ship captain, spoke quietly. That went as expected. Better, actually, Daewon replied. They're shocked, but they're willing to talk. I was half expecting them to simply dismiss us. They can't afford to, Hana observed. Our expansion has been faster than any species in recorded history. They're curious about us. Maybe even a little afraid. Through the chamber's transparent walls, they could see the human fleet in orbit around the Council's home world. 50 ships, each one representing humanity's cutting-edge technology. They were smaller than many of the Council's vessels, but they moved with a precision and speed that had caught the attention of every military observer. As if to emphasize the point, one of the human ships executed a series of maneuvers that caused several alien vessels to scramble their sensors. The ship seemed to fold space around itself, appearing in 3 different locations simultaneously before settling back into formation. It was a casual demonstration of human technology. Nothing that would be considered threatening, but it was enough to remind the Council that humanity was not primitive. Daewon watched the aliens watching his ships. They'll come back with a revised offer, he predicted. Something that seems more generous but still contains the same core requirement that we accept their authority in some form. And we'll refuse again, Hana said. It wasn't a question. As many times as necessary, Daewon confirmed. Humanity didn't fight its way to the stars just to bow to someone else's empire, no matter how old or powerful. Our ancestors chose freedom over security too many times for us to make a different choice now. The delegation made their way to their quarters, leaving the council chamber behind. Above them, human ships continued their patrol, independent and unbowed. The Galactic Council had maintained peace for 8,000 years by bringing every species under its authority. But humanity had just introduced a new variable into the equation, and the galaxy would never be quite the same again. 6 months had passed since Ambassador Daywan's refusal, and the Galactic Council was learning that humanity meant what it said. The emergency session had been called for the 3rd time that month, and the chamber was filled with anxious voices from 200 species who had never faced rejection before. Director Jin Woo sat in his office on Earth, reviewing the latest proposal from the Council. He was younger than Daywan, barely 40, but his sharp mind had earned him the position of heading Earth's External Affairs Division. The document on his screen was titled Economic Integration Proposal, and it was the Council's 2nd attempt to bring humanity into their fold. His assistant entered the office. Director, the Council delegation will arrive in 6 hours. They're expecting an answer. I was also okay. We are. Jinwoo nodded without looking up from the screen. They'll get one. Just not the one they want. The proposal was clever, he had to admit. Instead of demanding military compliance, the Council was offering economic incentives, access to trade routes that had existed for thousands of years, medical technologies that could extend human lifespans by decades, cultural exchange programs that would expose humanity to the wisdom of hundreds of civilizations. All they asked in return was that Earth accept galactic economic regulations and allow Council observers to monitor human territory. It sounded generous. It wasn't. Jinwoo had spent months studying the economic regulations. They were designed to ensure that no single species could become too powerful or too independent. Resource extraction was limited. Manufacturing capabilities were capped. Trade required Council approval. Every regulation seemed reasonable on its own, but together they formed a cage that would keep humanity dependent on the Council forever. He closed the document and looked out his window at the Seoul skyline. Below, millions of people went about their lives, unaware that their future was being decided in conversations with beings from distant stars. They trusted their government to protect their freedom, and Jinwoo would not betray that trust. When the Council delegation arrived, they were greeted with full diplomatic honors. Chancellor Kyra led the group, her amphibious features showing optimism despite the previous rejection. She had brought representatives from the Council's most successful trading civilizations, each one ready to describe the benefits of joining the galactic economy. The meeting took place in a conference room with walls that displayed real-time images of Earth's cities, farms, and orbital facilities. Jinwoo wanted the Council to see exactly what they were asking humanity to regulate. Director Jinwoo, Chancellor Kyra began, her voice warm and friendly. We have listened to humanity's concerns about sovereignty. This new proposal addresses those concerns by focusing on economic cooperation rather than political integration. Jinwoo gestured for her to continue, his face neutral. Kyra activated a holographic display that showed the Council's vast trade network. Glowing lines connected thousands of worlds, each one representing commerce, technology transfer, and cultural exchange. This network has brought prosperity to every member species. Poverty has been eliminated. Resource conflicts are a distant memory. All we ask is that humanity accept the same economic standards that have served the galaxy for millennia. And in return, one of the trade representatives added, you would gain access to technologies that would revolutionize your civilization. Disease would become optional. Energy would be unlimited. Your people would want for nothing. Jinwoo let them finish their presentation before responding. Chancellor, your offer is generous. The technologies you describe would indeed benefit humanity greatly. He paused, meeting her eyes. But we must decline. The disappointment in the room was palpable. Kyra's skin changed color slightly, a sign of distress in her species. "Director, may I ask why? We have removed the military requirements. We are not asking you to change your government or your laws. We simply ask that you participate in the galactic economy, according to established standards. Those standards would require us to limit our industrial capacity," Jinwoo explained. "They would cap our population growth. They would require council permission before we could establish new colonies or develop new resources. In effect, you would control our economic future, which means you would control our future entirely. The regulations exist to ensure sustainability," another council member protested. "Without them, species might overextend, deplete resources, or create economic imbalances that lead to conflict. Or," Jinwoo countered, "they might innovate, find new solutions, and grow beyond what the council considers safe or acceptable." Kyra leaned forward. "Director, you speak of risk, but you don't understand the dangers. The galaxy is vast and old. There are threats you haven't encountered yet. Species that have refused council protection have suffered terribly. Then we will suffer," Jinwoo said quietly. "But we will do so as a free people, making our own choices and living with our own consequences. We would rather fail on our own terms than succeed on yours." The meeting ended shortly after. The council delegation left Earth disappointed and frustrated. But Jinwoo knew this was only the beginning. The council had maintained its authority for 8,000 years, and they would not give up easily. His prediction proved accurate within days. The council announced new policies restricting human access to certain neutral zones. Diplomatic channels were limited. Several species that had been friendly to humanity suddenly became distant. It was clear that the council was applying pressure, hoping to make independence seem too costly. But the pressure had an unexpected effect. 3 council species, younger civilizations that still remembered their own initial reluctance to join, secretly approached Earth with private trade proposals. They didn't want to leave the council entirely, but they were interested in working with humanity outside of official channels. Admiral Subin, commander of humanity's defense fleet, brought this information to Jinwoo's attention. She was a stern woman with 30 years of military experience, and she didn't trust the council's motives. "They're trying to isolate us," she said, pointing to a star map that showed council restrictions. "But it's not working. Some species are more interested in us because we're independent." "The council knows that," Jinwoo replied. "That's what really worries them. We're not just refusing to join. We're showing others that refusal is possible." Meanwhile, in a laboratory complex orbiting Mars, engineer Tae Yang was putting the finishing touches on a project that would change everything. He was a brilliant but eccentric scientist who had spent 5 years developing a faster-than-light communication system that didn't rely on the Council's relay network. The Council's network was impressive, connecting the entire galaxy through ancient technology that they maintained and controlled. Every species in the Council depended on it for long-distance communication. But Tae Yang had found a different approach, using quantum entanglement in ways that Council science considered impossible. When his system came online, it allowed human colonies to communicate instantaneously without Council infrastructure. Earth could coordinate with its 47 systems in real time, making humanity's scattered settlements feel like a unified civilization. The Council noticed immediately. Their observers reported that human communications had become encrypted and independent. They sent a formal protest, claiming that unauthorized FTL communication violated galactic communications treaties. Jinwoo's response was simple. Humanity had never signed those treaties. The tension continued to build. Council ships began appearing near human territory. Not threatening but clearly observing, they watched human trade routes, monitored human colonies, and reported everything back to the Council chambers. Admiral Subin didn't tolerate the surveillance for long. When a Council observation fleet positioned itself in a system that humanity had claimed, she took action. Her ships appeared around the Council vessels, not with weapons charged but with a clear message broadcast on all frequencies. Council vessels, you are in human-claimed space without authorization. We respect your right to travel through neutral territory, but this system is ours. Please depart within 6 hours. The Council commander responded with indignation. This system is in neutral space according to galactic charts. The Council has the right to observe any territory. Not according to human charts, Subin replied calmly. We claimed this system 14 months ago and have established mining operations on 3 planets. You are welcome to verify this information, but you must do so from outside our territory. The standoff lasted for 3 hours. The Council ships outnumbered the human vessels 2-1, but they didn't have orders to engage in combat. Finally, they withdrew. But not before their commander sent a message promising that the Council would not forget this insult. Subin watched them go with satisfaction. They're used to species that back down, she told her crew. They don't know what to do with someone who stands firm. Round. Back on Earth, Jin Wu received reports of the incident, along with 3 new secret trade proposals from Council species and a formal complaint from the Council leadership. He also received intelligence that several Council species were now openly debating whether the accord was truly necessary. The galaxy was changing. For 8,000 years, the Council had been the only model of interstellar civilization. But now, humanity was offering an alternative. And some species were starting to wonder if freedom might be worth the risk. Jinwu looked at the reports and allowed himself a small smile. The Council had expected humanity to cave under pressure. Instead, they had created a crisis that threatened the very foundation of their authority, and the real conflict hadn't even begun yet. 18 months after humanity's first refusal, the Galactic Council faced a crisis unlike anything in their recorded history. The Grand Chamber, which had witnessed 8,000 years of peaceful integration, now echoed with angry voices and desperate arguments. High Arbiter Quinn stood at the center of the chaos, his ancient form barely moving. He was one of the oldest living beings in the galaxy, having helped write the original Galactic Accords 4,000 years ago. His species lived for tens of thousands of years, and in all his long existence, he had never seen the Council so divided. 7 species had withdrawn from secondary accords, citing humanity's example. They hadn't left the Council entirely, but they were questioning provisions they had accepted without protest for centuries. Trade agreements were being renegotiated. Military protocols were under review. The entire structure that had maintained galactic peace was beginning to crack. This is humanity's fault, War Marshal Thex declared, his reptilian features twisted in anger. They have shown others that defiance is possible. We must bring them into compliance before the entire Council collapses. We cannot force compliance, Councillor Rax replied, his crystalline body pulsing with agitated light. We have never used military force to compel membership. That would make us conquerors, not peacekeepers. Then what do you suggest? Thex demanded. We offer them everything, and they refuse. We apply pressure, and they resist. They are like a disease, spreading doubt throughout the galaxy. Quinn finally spoke, his voice quiet but carrying across the entire chamber. Perhaps it is not humanity that has changed. Perhaps it is we who must examine ourselves. The chamber fell silent. Quinn rarely spoke during debates, but when he did, everyone listened. The Accords were created to prevent war, Quinn continued, to ensure that no species would destroy another, that resources would be shared fairly, that the galaxy would know peace. And we have succeeded. For 8,000 years, we have maintained order. He paused, his ancient eyes surveying the assembled representatives. But in our success, have we also created stagnation? Stagnation? Velthos repeated, his wings fluttering nervously. The Council has brought prosperity to every member species. Yes, Quinn agreed. But when was the last time a Council species made a significant technological breakthrough? When did we last expand into new territories? When did we last do anything except maintain what already exists? The question hung in the air, unanswered. On Earth, President Yuna prepared for the most important journey of her life. She was traveling to the Council's home world, not to negotiate, but to explain. The Council had sent an invitation for her to address them directly, and she had accepted. Yuna was a woman in her mid-50s, a former professor of political philosophy who had been elected to lead Earth's government 2 years earlier. She understood that this moment would define humanity's relationship with the galaxy for generations to come. Her security advisor, Commander Jae-hwan, briefed her during the voyage. He was a special operations leader who had spent the past year investigating Council activities, and his findings were disturbing. Madam President, we've analyzed the Council's technological development over the past 3,000 years. The pattern is clear. Every major breakthrough comes from newly integrated species. Once a species joins the Council and accepts the Accords, their innovation rate drops by an average of 93% within a century. Yuna studied the data on her screen. They're suppressing development. Ds. Not intentionally, Jae-hwan said. The Accords don't explicitly forbid research, but they create a system where innovation isn't necessary. The Council provides everything a species needs. So, why take risks? Why push boundaries? Why struggle to create something new when you can simply receive it from the collective? Dr. Bo-ra, a xenoanthropologist who had been studying Council species for years, added her perspective. It's even worse than that. The Accords create a culture of dependency. Species begin to believe that the Council's way is the only way. They stop questioning, stop dreaming, stop trying to be better than they are. Show me the evidence, Yuna said. Bo-ra displayed her research. She had studied 50 Council species across their entire histories. The pattern was consistent and heartbreaking. Every species that joined the Council showed initial enthusiasm, gratitude, and cooperation. But within a few generations, that enthusiasm faded into comfortable complacency. They stopped producing art that challenged conventions. They stopped asking fundamental questions about the nature of reality. They stopped reaching for achievements that seemed impossible. They become content, Bo-ra explained. And contentment is the death of progress. When President Yuna arrived at the Council's homeworld, she was greeted with full honors. The Council was giving her the respect due to a head of state, hoping that courtesy would succeed where pressure had failed. She stood before the assembled Council, a single human facing the representatives of 216 civilizations. The chamber's translation systems hummed, ready to carry her words across the galaxy. Honored Council members, she began, her voice steady and clear. I come before you, not as a supplicant, seeking your approval, but as the representative of a free people who wish to explain their choice. She paused, letting her words settle. You have asked why humanity refuses the Accords. You have offered us technology, knowledge, and security. You cannot understand why we would reject such generosity. So I will explain as clearly as I can. Yuna activated a holographic display showing human history. Images of wars, disasters, and struggles filled the air. Humanity's journey to the stars was not easy. We fought wars that nearly destroyed us. We faced plagues, famines, and catastrophes. We made terrible mistakes and paid terrible prices. The images shifted to show achievements, cities rising from ruins, diseases being conquered, ships leaving Earth for the first time. But through all of it, we were free. Free to make our own choices, our own mistakes, our own discoveries. And that freedom, with all its dangers and all its costs, made us who we are. She deactivated the display and looked directly at the Council members. You offer us safety, and we appreciate that. But safety at the cost of our independence is not safety at all. It is a comfortable prison. You ask us to trust in your wisdom, and we acknowledge that your civilization is older and more experienced than ours. But wisdom cannot be given, it must be earned through experience. including the experience of failure. Murmurs ran through the chamber. Some angry, some thoughtful. The Accords, as currently written, would make humanity dependent on the Council. We would no longer need to innovate because you would provide for us. We would no longer need to struggle because you would protect us. We would no longer need to choose because you would guide us. And in accepting that comfortable existence, we would cease to be truly human. Velthos rose from his seat. President Yuna, you speak of freedom, but what of responsibility? What of the danger that unchecked species pose to themselves and others? The Accords exist because history has shown that independence leads to conflict. Perhaps, Yuna acknowledged. But it also leads to growth. Your history shows 8,000 years of peace, and that is admirable. But our research shows that those 8,000 years have also been 8,000 years of stagnation. When was the last time a council species expanded into unexplored regions? When was the last time one of your scientists made a discovery that revolutionized understanding? When was the last time any of you reached for something that seemed impossible? The chamber erupted. Half the council members shouted in protest, claiming that peace was worth any price. But the other half fell silent. Unable to answer her questions, President Yuna raised her hand, and the chamber gradually quieted. I am not here to condemn the council, she said. Your civilization has achieved something remarkable, and your intentions are noble. But humanity cannot accept a future where comfort replaces aspiration, where safety replaces adventure, and where contentment replaces the drive to become something greater than we are. She pulled out a data device and held it up. We have evidence that we would like to share with the Council and with every species in the galaxy. Evidence about how the Accords affect technological and cultural development. Evidence about the cost of your peace. We are not sharing this to attack you, but because we believe that truth should be freely available to all. Commander Jaehwan transmitted the data to the Council's systems. Within seconds, it was being distributed across the galactic network. The information showed exactly what Jaehwan and Bo-Ra had discovered: the systematic decline of innovation among Council species, the cultural stagnation, the comfortable surrender of ambition in exchange for security. The Council chamber descended into chaos. Some members accused humanity of manipulation. Others demanded to examine the evidence. Still, others sat in stunned silence, recognizing the truth in the data. High Arbiter Quinn studied the information with his ancient eyes. Finally, he spoke again. The data is accurate, he said quietly. I have lived long enough to witness this pattern myself, though I did not want to acknowledge it. We built the Accords to prevent destruction, but in doing so, we may have prevented growth as well. War Marshal Thex stood, his voice filled with fury. This is exactly why humanity must be brought into compliance. They spread chaos and doubt. They undermine everything we have built. Or, Counselor Rack said thoughtfully. President Yuna watched the Council tear itself apart over questions that should have been asked millennia ago. She felt no satisfaction in their crisis, only sadness for civilizations that had traded their futures for the illusion of eternal stability. The session ended without resolution. The Council was more divided than ever, and half the galaxy was now debating whether the Accords that had governed them for so long were a blessing or a curse. As Yuna prepared to return to Earth, Quinn approached her privately. President, what you have done today will have consequences that reach across the galaxy for generations. I know, Yuna replied. But humanity learned long ago that comfortable lies are more dangerous than uncomfortable truths. The ancient arbiter nodded slowly. Perhaps the galaxy needed to learn that lesson as well. 2 years after humanity's first contact with the Galactic Council, the galaxy was fracturing. What had been a unified civilization for 8,000 years was now splitting into factions, each with different visions of the future. Ambassador Dong Hyun sat in a conference room aboard a neutral station, surrounded by representatives from 14 species that had formally withdrawn from the Galactic Council. They called themselves the Coalition of Independent Systems, and they looked to humanity for guidance on how to maintain their freedom. "The Council is threatening economic sanctions," said one representative, a being whose species had only joined the Council 2 centuries earlier. "They claim we are violating treaties by leaving. Those treaties were signed under duress," another argued. "We were told that joining was the only path to prosperity. Now we know that was a lie." Dong-hyun listened carefully. He was younger than most of Earth's senior diplomats, barely 35. But he had a gift for seeing through complicated situations, to find simple truths. The question isn't whether the Council can threaten you. They obviously can. The question is whether you believe your freedom is worth the cost of their displeasure. "Easy for you to say," a third representative said, not unkindly. "Humanity has been independent from the start. We have to break away from systems we've relied on for generations." "And that's true," Dong-hyun acknowledged. "But every species in this room has already made the hard choice. You've already left. Now we need to figure out how to make independence work." He activated a holographic display showing trade routes, resource networks, and communication systems. The Council maintained power by making themselves necessary. They controlled the trade routes, the technology exchanges, the communication relays. If we want to be truly independent, we need to build our own infrastructure. "That will take decades," someone protested. "Yes," Dong-hyun agreed. "But humanity has been developing our own systems for the past 2 years. We're willing to share what we've learned. We can't give you everything the Council provided, not yet. But we can give you a foundation to build on." While the coalition was forming, the remains of the Galactic Council was becoming increasingly desperate. War Marshal Thex had gained support among the hardline faction, arguing that the only way to restore order was through a demonstration of force. "We don't need to wage war," Thex explained to his supporters. "We simply need to show these rebellious species what they are risking by abandoning Council protection. A military exercise near human territory would remind them of the Council's power." Primarch Velthos, who had grown weary of the conflict, reluctantly agreed. "No actual combat," he insisted. "Just a show of force. Perhaps it will convince them to negotiate seriously." The Council assembled a fleet of 300 ships and positioned them at the border of human space. It was an impressive display vessels from 100 different species, representing the accumulated military might of the oldest civilization in the galaxy. Admiral Subin received the intelligence report while reviewing defensive positions around Earth's outer colonies. She called an immediate meeting with her senior commanders. "The Council has deployed a fleet to our border," she announced, displaying the tactical situation. 300 ships, positioned in what they're calling a military exercise. "They want to intimidate us. Do we have enough ships to match them?" one commander asked. "Not in numbers," Subin admitted. "But we don't need to match them. We just need to make sure they understand that intimidation won't work." She began issuing orders. The human defense fleet, numbering only 70 ships, moved to intercept positions along the border. They were outnumbered more than 4-1, but Subin had no intention of backing down. The two fleets faced each other across an invisible line in space. For 3 days, neither side moved. The Council commanders waited for the humans to withdraw or request negotiations. The human ships simply maintained their positions, weapons systems ready but not charged, sending a clear message: "Cross this line, and you will regret it." War Marshal Thex grew frustrated. The demonstration was supposed to intimidate humanity, but instead, the humans were turning it into a test of will that the Council couldn't afford to fail. "Charge weapons," Thex ordered. "Let them see we're serious." Admiral Subin saw the Council ships powering up their weapon systems. She smiled grimly and gave her own order. "Match them. Charge weapons but hold fire. Let them make the first move if they dare." The standoff escalated. Both fleets were now prepared for combat, waiting for someone to blink. The tension rippled across the galaxy as species on both sides watched to see if 8,000 years of peace would end over humanity's refusal to submit. Then something unexpected happened. Captain Minseo's exploration vessel, the Horizon, had been conducting a survey mission in deep space, far from the standoff. Her crew was small, just 15 people, but they were among humanity's best scientists and explorers. Her sensor operator called out an anomaly. "Captain, I'm detecting unusual energy signatures in the neighboring system. They don't match any known technology." Minseo altered course to investigate. What she found changed everything. The system was filled with ancient machines, massive constructs that had been dormant for millennia. But her ship's approach had triggered something, and the machines were waking up. They began moving with purpose, targeting her ship with weapons systems that predated the Galactic Council itself. Minseo barely escaped, but she had recorded everything. The data was terrifying. These machines weren't just dangerous. They were intelligent, systematic, and they were expanding their territory. She transmitted her findings to both the human fleet and the Council fleet at the border. "This is Captain Minseo of the Horizon. I've encountered an unknown threat in the Kepler 442 system. Ancient, automated weapons platforms, still active and hostile. Recommend immediate investigation." Admiral Subin received the transmission and immediately saw the larger picture. Then she opened a channel to the Council fleet. "War Marshal Thex, I'm transmitting data from one of our exploration vessels. I think you need to see this. 18 doxes. By." Thex was initially suspicious, wondering if this was some kind of trick. But when he reviewed Captain Minseo's data, his expression changed from anger to alarm. He had seen references to something like this in the Council's oldest archives, warnings from the civilizations that had founded the Council. While both fleets were processing this new information, researcher Insu was making his own discovery on Earth. He had spent 2 years studying the Council's history, digging through archives and ancient documents that most species had forgotten. What he found was buried in records from the Council's founding. The original species that created the Galactic Accords hadn't done so out of purely peaceful intentions. They had been fleeing from something, an ancient enemy that their own expansion had awakened. Insu's research revealed that long before the current civilizations, there had been other galactic powers. One of them had created automated defense systems designed to destroy any spacefaring civilization that grew too large or too advanced. Those systems had wiped out their creators and then gone dormant, waiting for new targets. The Galactic Council hadn't been built just to maintain peace. It had been built to keep species small, scattered, and beneath the threshold that would trigger the ancient weapons. The Accord's restrictions on military development, territorial expansion, and technological progress, all of it was designed to keep the galaxy's civilizations invisible to the ancient threat. Insu transmitted his findings to President Yuna, who immediately understood the implications. The Council hadn't been suppressing innovation out of a desire for control. They had been doing it out of fear, trying to keep the galaxy safe from an enemy they hoped would never wake up. But humanity's rapid expansion, their military development, and their refusal to limit their growth had triggered exactly what the Council feared. Captain Minseo hadn't just found old machines. She had found the beginning of an extinction-level threat. When Insu's research and Minseo's data were shared with both the Council and the Coalition, the entire galaxy fell silent. The petty disputes about the Accords suddenly seemed insignificant. Whether species were independent or not wouldn't matter if they were all destroyed by ancient machines. At the border, Admiral Subin and War Marshal Thex found themselves in an unexpected conversation. The standoff was forgotten, replaced by a much more urgent discussion about survival. "How many of these weapons platforms are there?" Subin asked. "The old records suggest thousands," Thex replied, his earlier hostility replaced by grim professionalism. "They're scattered across the galaxy, dormant until they detect civilizations that meet certain criteria. Criteria like rapid expansion and advanced military technology," Subin said quietly. "Criteria like humanity." "Yes," Thex admitted. The Council has been trying to prevent this awakening for 8,000 years. And in less than 3 years, humanity has triggered it. Subin met his gaze steadily. So, what do we do now? Thex looked at the human admiral with grudging respect. Despite the catastrophe, she wasn't panicking or making excuses. She was ready to face the problem head-on. I don't know, he said honestly. The ancient records say these weapons destroyed civilizations far more advanced than any species in the current council. They adapted to any defense, overwhelmed any fleet, and pursued their targets across the galaxy. The species that created the council survived by hiding, by making themselves small and insignificant. That's not an option anymore, Subin said. The machines are awake. Hiding won't save us. No, Thex agreed. It won't. News of the ancient threat spread across the galaxy within hours. Every species, whether in the Council or the Coalition, suddenly faced the same question. How do you fight an enemy that has already destroyed civilizations more advanced than yours? President Yuna called for an emergency summit, inviting both the Council and the Coalition. We can argue about independence later, she announced. Right now, we need to figure out how to survive. The galaxy was united by fear, if nothing else. But unity born from terror was fragile, and the ancient machines were just beginning to wake up. 3 years after humanity's first contact with the Galactic Council, the galaxy was at war with an enemy that didn't negotiate, didn't retreat, and didn't die. The ancient weapons platforms had awakened across 17 systems, and each attack followed the same pattern. The machines would arrive, systematically destroy all spacefaring infrastructure, and then move to the next system. They ignored planets without technology and focused solely on eliminating advanced civilizations. Fleet Admiral Hyunwoo stood on the bridge of the Earth defense ship Unity, watching tactical displays that showed the extent of the crisis. He was a career military officer who had never expected to command a combined fleet of human and alien vessels, but circumstances had made the impossible necessary. Admiral, the Council Remnant Fleet is requesting permission to join our formation, his communication officer reported. Hyunwoo glanced at the display. The Council Remnant Fleet was what remained of the species that had stayed loyal to the old Galactic Council, even after the crisis began. They had initially refused to work with humanity, clinging to their old ways and old fears. But after losing 6 systems to the ancient machines, they had finally accepted reality. Grant permission, Hyunwoo ordered. Assign them to defensive screen beta, and send them our tactical protocols. If they're going to fight with us, they need to follow our procedures. Council Speaker Voth watched the integration from her ship, feeling the weight of 8,000 years of tradition crumbling around her. She had spent her entire life believing in the Council's way, in the wisdom of the Accords, in the value of stability over progress. But the ancient threat had proven one thing beyond doubt. Survival required adaptation, not preservation. She opened a channel to Admiral Hyunwoo. Admiral, my fleet is at your disposal. What are your orders? The casual way she accepted human authority would have been unthinkable 3 years ago. But Voth had learned what many council species were still struggling to accept: competence mattered more than tradition. And humanity's military doctrine was keeping people alive. Humanity's approach to warfare was different from the Council's. The Council had spent thousands of years maintaining defensive positions and avoiding conflict. Their military existed to deter, not to fight. Humanity, having lived through centuries of warfare before reaching the stars, had developed tactics based on aggression, adaptability, and accepting casualties in pursuit of victory. It was this difference that made the human fleet effective against the ancient machines. While council ships tried to minimize damage and retreat when threatened, human ships pressed attacks, adapted tactics in real time, and were willing to sacrifice individual vessels to achieve strategic goals. The key breakthrough came from scientist Unji, a brilliant researcher who had assembled a team of experts from 40 different species. She had been studying the ancient machines for months, trying to understand how they worked and how they could be stopped. Her laboratory was located on a remote asteroid, far from any inhabited systems. The walls were covered with displays showing machine schematics, attack patterns, and energy signatures. Her team worked around the clock, driven by the knowledge that every day they failed to find a solution meant more systems destroyed. The machines are adaptive, Unji explained to her team during one of their daily briefings. They learn from each encounter, updating their tactics and defenses. That's why conventional weapons are becoming less effective with each battle. So how do we fight something that learns from everything we do? Asked one of her alien colleagues. A crystalline being whose species specialized in energy weapons. We find the thing they can't learn, Yunji replied. She pulled up a schematic of a machine's core systems. They're incredibly advanced. But they're still following programming from civilizations that existed millions of years ago. That programming has rules, limitations, and patterns. She highlighted a specific system within the machine's architecture. This is their central processing network. It's distributed across thousands of nodes, which makes them nearly impossible to destroy. But distribution also means coordination, and coordination requires communication. A human engineer on her team, a young man named Wonsik, saw where she was going. If we can disrupt their communication, even temporarily, we can turn their distributed intelligence into a weakness. The different parts of each machine would stop working together. Exactly, Unji confirmed. And I think I know how to do it. Her solution combined human innovation with alien knowledge in ways that neither could have achieved alone. She used quantum disruption technology from a species that had joined the coalition, integrated it with human electromagnetic pulse systems, and powered it with energy sources that the Council had kept restricted for thousands of years. The result was a weapon that could temporarily disable the ancient machines' coordination networks, leaving them vulnerable to conventional attacks for approximately 17 minutes before they adapted. 17 minutes wasn't much, but it was enough. Admiral Hyun Woo received Unji's weapon specifications and immediately began planning an assault on the ancient machine's main stronghold. Intelligence had identified a system where the machines appeared to be coordinating their expansion, a central hub that controlled their strategic movements. If we can destroy their central coordination, Hyunwoo explained to his commanders, we won't stop all the machines, but we'll disrupt their organized expansion. We'll buy ourselves time to develop more permanent solutions. General Sang-hoon, who had been coordinating ground operations across multiple species, outlined the assault plan. We'll need to deploy ground forces to plant the disruption devices at specific points around the enemy stronghold. The devices are too large to deliver via orbital bombardment, and they need precise positioning. That means putting soldiers on a planet controlled by ancient killing machines. One of the council commanders observed. Yes, Sang-hoon replied simply. It's dangerous. Many won't come back, but it's necessary. The assault force assembled over the course of 3 weeks. 50,000 soldiers from 20 species trained together, learning to coordinate, despite different biologies, different tactics, and different philosophies of war. Humans worked alongside crystalline warriors who communicated through light patterns, amphibious fighters who excelled in aquatic environments, and massive beings whose strength could tear through reinforced armor. General Sang-hoon walked among the troops the night before the assault, speaking with soldiers from every species. He found that despite their differences, they all shared the same determination they would not let their civilizations be destroyed without a fight. The battle for the machine stronghold lasted for 8 hours and cost 7,000 lives. Human ships led the initial assault, drawing the machine's defensive fire while coalition vessels moved into flanking positions. Council remnant forces, following human tactical protocols for the first time, provided support fire that kept the machines from overwhelming any single position. On the ground, General Sang-hoon's mixed species force fought through automated defenses to plant Unji's disruption devices. The machines adapted quickly, but the diversity of the assault force worked in their favor every time the machines optimized their defenses against one species. Another would exploit the opening. When the disruption devices activated, the effect was immediate and dramatic. The ancient machines, which had fought with perfect coordination, suddenly became disorganized. Different sections stopped communicating, Strategic movements became chaotic, and defensive patterns fell apart. All ships, concentrate fire on the central processing hub, Admiral Hyun-woo ordered. We have 17 minutes. Make them count. The combined fleet unleashed everything they had: human missiles, Council energy weapons, coalition kinetic projectiles. All of it focused on a single target. The ancient hub, which had withstood attacks for millennia, finally crumbled under the coordinated assault of species that had set aside their differences to fight for survival. When the hub was destroyed, the machines across the galaxy didn't shut down, but their expansion stopped. Without central coordination, they reverted to defending the systems they already controlled, no longer capable of organized conquest. The galaxy had won a critical victory, though the war was far from over. But more importantly, they had proven that cooperation between independent species was not only possible, but more effective than the Council's old model of enforced conformity. 3 months after the battle, representatives from every species in the galaxy gathered to sign a new agreement. It wasn't called the Galactic Council. It was called the Galactic Defense Alliance. The terms were simple. Each species maintained complete sovereignty over their own territory and decisions. No species could command another. Decisions required majority consent, and any species could leave at any time. But all members committed to mutual defense and agreed to share technology and resources freely during times of crisis. It was everything the old council had feared: voluntary, decentralized, and without any overriding authority. It was also more unified than the council had ever been, because unity based on choice was stronger than unity based on obligation. Council Speaker Voth signed the charter on behalf of the species that had once ruled the galaxy. She looked at the document and felt no regret for what was being lost, only hope for what might be gained. We spent 8,000 years trying to prevent catastrophe through control, she said during the signing ceremony. But in the end, freedom and cooperation saved us better than control ever could. Ambassador Day One, now in his 70s, attended the ceremony as an honored guest. A young alien diplomat approached him, curious about the human who had started everything by simply saying no. "Ambassador, why was humanity so stubborn?" the young diplomat asked. "You could have accepted the council's offer and avoided all of this conflict." Day One smiled, the same calm smile he had shown in the council chamber 3 years earlier. "We weren't being stubborn. We were being human. We would rather fail as free beings than succeed as subjects." "But you didn't fail," the diplomat observed. "No," Day One agreed. "We didn't. But that wasn't guaranteed when we made our choice. We accepted the risk of failure because we believed freedom was worth it. And once we made that choice, we discovered something important." "What was that?" "That you can have both freedom and success. You don't have to choose between them, but you have to be willing to fight for both, and you have to be willing to help others do the same." 1, 2, 1. 50 years later, the Galactic Defense Alliance included 189 species. The ancient machines had been systematically neutralized, though a few still operated in remote systems, serving as reminders of what the galaxy had overcome. The alliance was messier than the old council had been. Species argued constantly about policies, resources, and priorities. There was no single authority to impose order, no ancient wisdom to guide every decision. Conflicts arose and had to be resolved through negotiation rather than decree. But the galaxy was also more alive than it had been in millennia. New technologies emerged every year. Species expanded into unexplored territories. Art, philosophy, and science flourished as civilizations rediscovered the joy of striving for something greater than comfortable survival. Humanity wasn't special because they were stronger or smarter than other species. They were special because they had refused to accept that safety required surrender. And in doing so, they had reminded the galaxy of a truth that had been forgotten: that the greatest strength comes not from the security of submission, but from the courage to remain free. The galaxy was more dangerous than it had been under the Council's protection. There were risks, failures, and occasional conflicts. But there was also growth, innovation, and the possibility of becoming something greater than anyone had imagined. And in the end, every species in the Alliance agreed that it was worth it.